Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to the 8th meeting of 2025 of the Economy and the Fair Work Committee. Our first item of business is a short evidence session on the draft Tide Pubs Miscellaneous Amendment Scotland Regulations 2025. I'm pleased to welcome our panel this morning, Tom Arthur, Minister for Employment and Investment, Aileen Bearhop, Head of Industry Development, and Mairead McCrossan, a lawyer from the Scottish Government. Good morning to our panel. I'd like to invite the Minister to make a short opening statement.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to the committee, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to introduce these regulations. I appeared before the committee in June last year when you were considering the Scottish Pubs Code Regulations 2024 and related SSIs. The Scottish Pubs Code will improve the position of Tide Pub tenants through the creation of a statutory framework to govern the relationship between pub-owning businesses and their Tide Pub tenants. At the time of the committee session, I was aware of significant stakeholder concerns about the regulations and particularly the code. I was not able to withdraw the regulations in June, but I undertook to carry out a further focused and targeted consultation on the Scottish Pubs Code. I said that I intended to bring forward a further SSI making amendments to the code and that I would seek to bring the legislation into force as soon as possible. The SSI before you is the result of that further consultation. I and my officials have engaged fully with stakeholders in the development of this legislation. The consultation process involved the receipt of written proposals from stakeholders, followed by workshops and a formal written consultation. The intention was not to reopen fundamental policy debates around the Act, and so the focus has been on some key areas of concern raised by tenants, pub-owning businesses and their representative organisations. I am grateful to stakeholders for their continued engagement in this work. The policy area remains a difficult one, with stakeholders diametrically opposed on certain matters. It is a difficult balancing act and consensus has not always been possible. But the purpose of the code is to improve the position of Tide Pub tenants, and I believe it now achieves that purpose more effectively. I think this SSI ensures that the code fulfils the intentions of the Tide Pub Scotland Act and is consistent with its regulatory principles. I am also conscious of the significant challenges for all businesses at this time. And so I have sought to ensure that we do not put unnecessary demands on pub-owning businesses where that is possible, whilst still improving the position of Tide Pub tenants. The SSI will see some aspects of the code, including the guest beer arrangement and information provisions, coming into force on 31st March 2025. In response to concerns from some pub-owning businesses about their preparedness, I have provided for the market rent only and rent assessment and review provisions to come into force on 30th June. Once in place, the code will be monitored and enforced by the adjudicator. The adjudicator and her office have been working hard to prepare for the code coming into force, and I am pleased that this has involved good engagement with the sector. The Act requires that the work of the adjudicator and the code will be reviewed after 31st March 2026 and every 3 years thereafter. We must continue to ensure that the code is proportionate and in keeping with the obligations of the Act. And with that, I will conclude and be happy to take any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Minister. As you rightly said, the committee did discuss quite a lot of the issues when you gave evidence in June, but I do know that some members have some questions, so can I ask Murdo Fraser to start?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister and officials. Just to pick up on your comments about the background to this, as you said, the committee looked at this last year. There were quite a number of concerns that were raised with us by stakeholders on both sides, and I think it's fair to say, as you characterised it, there are sometimes almost irreconcilable differences between different parties here, the pub tenants on the one side and the large breweries on the other who own the pubs, and sometimes it's very difficult to find any consensus between the two. So you said there had been additional consultation. From that consultation, have you been able to draw any sort of consensus about the way forward?
If I can perhaps just characterise the approach that I have taken in this. Firstly is not to make the perfect the enemy of the good. I am conscious that there's an obligation for this code to come into effect, given this was a piece of legislation, the Act. It was received unanimous support in Parliament. For reasons that the committee is well versed in, there has been a significant delay in these regulations being able to come forward. And so what I have sought to do is consistent with the obligations to bring the code into force as soon as possible. I have sought to bring forward amendments and through this process of consultation in this SSI that may not necessarily represent the fully desired objectives of either party, but can represent an improvement on the position as it was. So not making the perfect enemy of the good. The second point is that under the Act, there is that obligation for a review to be conducted after the 31st of March next year. Now, of course, when the bill was passed, that was back in 2021. So clearly that was in a 5-year window. Clearly the position we're in now, in terms of having to conform with the Act, means that there will be a review next year and then 3 years subsequently and onwards. So the second part is that there's going to be an opportunity at that particular point through a review process to consider how the code has impacted on both tenants and pub owning businesses in its first year of operation. And obviously, out of that review process, to consider whether further changes can be made that can improve the position of Tide pub tenants while still being consistent with the regulatory principles as well. So the focus has been in trying to identify what would be an acceptable set of regulations that would, if not command a full-throated support of each party, would at least be able to command their acceptance, which I'm hopeful that we have achieved. And that this can rather not be seen as an end of the process, but a beginning where through that review in a year's time and subsequent reviews, there will be an opportunity for further consideration and consultation and engagement, and through that identify any further improvements that can be made.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate we have a review in a year's time. We have the code coming into effect on the 31st of March, which is only, what, three weeks from now. So we're very much in the 11th hour in advance of that. We've had a few concerns raised with us by the Scottish Beer and Pub Association, which represents, as you know, the landlords. Let me just put some of these points to you and get your response if I can. One issue they've raised with us is their concern about the number of pub companies and tenants who are unaware of the code, which is coming in just a few weeks' time. And they say that both the Scottish Government and the Scottish Pubs Code adjudicator have not been able to identify all impacted businesses. And I think it's unlikely that this will be done before the 31st of March. So what is the Scottish Government doing to try and address that issue where people might not be aware that this code is coming in?
First point I would make, of course, is that this is legislation that was passed 4 years ago. The original regulations were brought before the committee in summer of last year. So there has, in terms of this, been a live issue, and in terms of it's been something that was forthcoming. There has been an opportunity for awareness to be raised, but with the appointment of the Pub Code adjudicator, I know that she's been undertaking work to increase awareness and working constructively with stakeholders to help increase awareness. The second point I would want to make is that I will certainly be undertaking activity as a minister around the time of the coming into force to help raise awareness amongst pub owning businesses, tenants and wider stakeholders of the code and of the obligations under it. And the third point I would make, and this may be a point you perhaps were intending to raise, Mr Fraser, but the stakeholders have raised the point of whether or not there could be around enforcement during the early phases of the pub code being into effect. That is certainly obviously it's a decision for the adjudicator, but it is something that I will ask the adjudicator to consider. And as well as that, responding to the concerns of the pub owning businesses, that slightly later commencement date at the end of June of the specific provisions with regards to MRO and rent assessment and review. So that is sought to respond to some of these issues around implementation. And implementation has been a clear concern that has been raised with me with the pub owning businesses, and I have sought to balance that with the obligation to bring the code into force, and particularly given the significant delays already. So that is how I've sought to address that, and the pub code adjudicator has an important role to play there, and I will be asking the pub code adjudicator if any consideration can be given to how enforcement is considered in the early period of operation of the pub code, given that there is still this work required to be undertaken around awareness raising.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. The second point that they've raised with us is their concern that there's no information about the total cost of the code or the amounts that will be levied against pub companies to pay for the adjudicator. So this is being introduced, but they don't know what the cost will be.
Specifically on the cost, I'm going to just ask Aileen if you want to come in.
The adjudicator is... The difficulty with the cost issue is that we don't know how many cases there will be that will be brought forward to adjudicator. So they are at the moment working out their sums for the next year and how that's going to work. And they're also working hard on how the levy itself will work. There is within the impact assessments, impact statements that we did, the BRIA, some cost implications there. I haven't got the exact figures around. I could provide them if need be. But hopefully, shortly, well, fairly soon, there'll be some indication to pub companies about what that levy might look like. It has to be, the Minister has to approve the idea of a levy before that happens.
So the adjudicator is currently funded by Scottish Government?
Yes.
And do you know how much the cost of that is?
The cost, and we have a budget of £200,000 for the year, but we're nowhere close to spending that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. And the third point raised with us is around the lack of statutory guidance and how the code will operate in practice. They say that pubcos were being told that guidance would be required, or that they said that guidance should be required at least 6 months before the introduction of the code. And they're concerned about the guest beer provision that are in the regulations, which they say will be very difficult for pubcos to manage or monitor, and there's no guidance as to how the SPCA, the adjudicator, will deal with this. So when do we expect any guidance to be issued?
The matter of guidance, the question of guidance would be a matter for the pub code adjudicator, but I do appreciate the specific point around guest beer, and should the regulations be approved by Parliament, I will write to the pub code adjudicator to raise specific concerns.
But given that we're expecting the new rules to come in from 31st of March, will there be guidance in place before then?
Well, as I say, the pub code adjudicator is engaging closely with pub owning businesses and tenants, and I would refer you to my previous point about the question of enforcement, given that in the early phases of the code coming into force, and on the specific point around guidance, well, it is for the adjudicator to make that decision. I will write to the adjudicator, respecting their position, but I will write to them to convey the concerns that have been raised by stakeholders and by the committee on behalf of stakeholders.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I bring in Daniel Johnson?
Thank you. Apologies for that. Just a couple of broad questions, and again, I sort of slightly ask the forgiveness of my committee colleagues who have been through this, the first iteration of regulations. I'm slightly late to this party. But given that the substance of these regulations is about the principle of fairness, the balance between the landlord and tenant, can I just ask kind of what, as you've been looking at the operation of this and how it will operationalise, what context has been taken into consideration, given that there can be a broad range of different arrangements in a commercial lease situation beyond this, you know, looking at retail and other contexts? Will the adjudicator be, when it's adjudicating on the basis of fairness, be looking purely at the pub industry, or have a broader range of contexts in terms of the commercial arrangements that exist be taken into consideration?
I think the important context for the operation of the adjudicator is the regulatory principles which are set out on the face of the Act, and you identify that point around a fair share of risk and rewards. Equally, tenants should be no worse off than if they were not subject to a product or a service tie, and indeed the need for the lawful treatment by pub owning companies in relation to their tenants. So these principles that are set out within the face of the Act create, as well as the pub code itself, create the context in which the adjudicator would operate. More broadly on the point of context, as I touched on in my opening remarks, I'm acutely aware of the challenges that all businesses, but particularly the hospitality sector, are facing at the moment, and that has certainly informed the decision that I've taken with regards to the differentiated commencement dates for different parts of the regulations, and also the points that I made with regards to my intention, subject to the regulations being agreed by Parliament, to write to the pub code adjudicator, specifically on the points around guest beer and the question of guidance, and equally the question of enforcement in the early period. So on that broader question of economic context and the challenges the hospitality sector have faced, that is something that I have taken into account, and which is why I referred to it in my opening remarks.
And just further to that, I mean, I think we're all aware of the current state of pubs in particular within hospitality, and the decline in their number. Indeed, I'm sure we're all aware of pubs that have closed in our own constituencies and regions. And indeed, there's a tenant very close to me who's just given up his lease in what you'd imagine is a very successful pub. Is that broader context around kind of the health of particularly pubs going to be taken into consideration explicitly, or is that just going to be broader context in terms of the work of the adjudicator and actually the overall framework of this legislation?
Well, the adjudicator, as you identify, operates within the framework of the legislation, but they have that autonomy and independence in terms of how they take their decisions. But the adjudicator engages closely with stakeholders representing both the pub owning companies and tenants, so will be well versed in the issues that are most relevant and pertinent. But certainly in terms of my role as the Minister leading on this and bringing forward these regulations, I have had a substantive engagement with both tenants and representatives of pub owning businesses and directly from pub owning businesses. And I want to be mindful of the obligations placed on ministers in bringing forward the regulations under the Act, the clear policy intent behind the regulations of strengthening the position of tenants, but also being cognisant both of the challenges that hospitality faces, and also wanting to ensure that Scotland remains an open, welcoming and positive environment for investment, including within hospitality and from pub-owning businesses.
Thank you.
I don't think there are any other questions from any member, so I'll move to agenda item 2, which is the formal consideration of the motion to approve the instrument. As a reminder, only members and the Minister may take part in this agenda item, and I invite the Minister to speak to and move the motion S6M 16234 that the Economy and Fair Work Committee recommends that the Tide Pubs Miscellaneous Amendment Scotland Regulations 2025 draft be approved. Minister.
Moved.
Thank you very much for that. Do any members wish to speak in the discussion? No. Okay. As no members wish to speak, I'll put the question on the motion. The question is that motion S6M 16234 be approved. Are we all agreed? Okay, thank you very much for that. We're agreed. The motion is therefore approved. A short report of the committee's decision will be prepared and published. I invite the committee to delegate responsibility to me as convener for agreeing that committee's report. Members happy with that? Yep. Okay, and I thank the Minister and his officials for joining us today. We'll now move into private session for our final agenda item. Thank you.